Tonight we are going to talk about something that I think probably quite a lot of people do find quite stressful on occasion, and that is sewing with stretch fabrics. Now, the thing about stretch fabrics is, frankly, in the world that we now live in, when you go and buy anything pretty much to wear, the chances are it's got some element of stretch in it, which means it's a little bit difficult to avoid it. And an awful lot of wardrobe staples are stretchy t-shirts, leggings, underwear, swimwear, and all kinds of really comfortable stuff. Who's that? Jill, hello. Thank goodness you've found me. And Greshna. So I'm you can hear me, you can see me. It's marvelous. So yes, so stretch is definitely one of those things that it is worth getting to grips with on your sewing machine. And even if you don't actually make things from scratch, because let's be fair, when you actually look at stretch fabrics, they're not always cheap, are they? And I think if you feel a little bit nervous about sewing with stretch, then sometimes you'll see the price and you'll just think, oh, actually, I don't want to take that chance in case I mess it up. And in which case, I think one of the best ways to ease your way in, if you haven't sewn with stretch fabrics before, is just to go through your wardrobe, find a load of, and you will have them, a load of t-shirts and just anything that's stretchy and different kinds of stretchy that maybe were going to go into the recycling bin or something. And that is what you can practice on, cutting up old pairs of joggers that maybe you've worn that have got paint on or something. You can easily transform into little pairs of toddler joggers and things like that. But even just to practice the stitches. And this month, the PDF download that I did, it's not backwards, by the way. When you print it out, you'll be glad to know. The PDF is these little header cards that I have done. Fliss. It looks tidy. That's because you can't see what's over the back of that shelf. And that's the way it's staying. So, yeah, it feels more like a workshop sometimes. But these little header cards, I mean, I've done them for the stretch fabrics for tonight, but actually it's probably worth, especially if you have got a new to you machine or you've got a lot of stitches on your machine that you're kind of thinking, oh, don't know what that one's for. They're very, very useful because what I've done is I've literally gone through, and as you can see, there are quite a lot of stretch stitches and options around. I knew I was going to do that. It's okay, they're all still here. But I've done lots of samples, and I have only done samples here in one particular stretch fabric, and this is an organic cotton jersey that I absolutely love, and I do use that quite a lot. So I think what is also a good idea, particularly with stretchy fabrics, while we're on the subject, is if you find one you like and you do a little tester of the stitches that you want to use, write on the back where you got it from and what it was called, because when you're buying these sorts of fabrics, it can be such a minefield. The descriptions can all be different. So if you're not able to actually get and feel them and touch them and pull them around and everything, then it does make a difference if you actually know where they come from. I've got quite a few places where I regularly buy my stretch fabrics because I know that I like the stuff they have generally, and I also know when they describe things what I'm getting. A lot of places, if you're having to buy online, a lot of places will send you samples as well, which isn't a bad idea, because if you haven't sort of found your way into stretch fabrics, then that's quite a good way. You could just order up quite a few different samples of different types, and that will give you an idea, because they're all called different things. And unfortunately, everything pretty much has a different element of stretch in it. Sometimes they will actually tell you how much stretch is in it. And normally if you're between 8%, 5% lycra content, then that's going to have a decent amount of stretch and what is called recovery. Okay, when you're buying stretch fabrics, if you've got a pattern already, or if you're going to buy a pattern to make, if you're buying the big four, and I mean Simplicity, McCall's, Vogue, New Look, on the back of their patterns they do what is called the pick a knit rule. And this is quite helpful if you're a bit of a newbie to it, because what it actually means is, let me get in closer. I might turn the camera around in a minute actually, because I feel like you can't really see. Can you see? There's this line here, it's black, and then it goes to white. So what this means, and I'm going to hold it up, you get a sample of what you're looking at, the stretch fabric, without stretching it. Take it to the end of the black line, it's normally about 4 inches, and then stretch it, and if it stretches easily to the end there, the white bit with the arrow, that means that that fabric has got enough stretch for that particular pattern. Okay, obviously patterns will recommend fabrics on the back, but if they're saying jerseys 2-way stretch, I mean, you know, so many different fabrics out there, and if you don't know about that, then it does make it a little bit tricky. So that little tip there about the stretching it is quite a good one. You will also find with stretch fabrics that the majority of them will either be 2-way stretch or 4-way stretch. And 2-way means that it's going to go stretchy, and that would go around the body because the grain is here. So when you put your pattern piece on, the stretch is going across the body. Sometimes those stretch patterns will actually have an arrow showing you the direction of the stretch. So you'll have a stretch that way. That's 2-way stretch. Some might not have a stretch that way at all. So this one here, for example, is what's called a ponte, and it's got a bit of stretch here, but when you go the other way, no, hardly any movement at all. So that is a definite 2-way stretch, whereas this one stretching that way but also stretching that way as well. Okay, and that is something that, as I say, on the back of the patterns or the recommendations for the patterns, they will normally say 2-way, 4-way stretch. Okay, and you just need to bear that in mind. I think going through your wardrobe is actually quite a good trick with this, because, you know, just literally go through all the stretchy things in your wardrobe doing that. And then you'll go, oh, that's a 4-way, that's a 2-way, just to kind of, you know, get your head in the game of how these fabrics are going to work. So I have got, I'm going to use for the majority of the samples this 4-way stretch. Okay, and as I say, it's a really nice weight, good amount of recovery, and recovery means that you stretch it out and then it comes back to where it was, because what you don't want, and we've all had it, those cheap t-shirts that just stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch and keep stretching and then just never come back, do they? And then we'll have a little look at some of the sort of fancier bits that you might find out there as well. But let's turn you around, get to the machine, so we can actually start looking at the stitches. And then I've got pages of information to go through that I'm going to throw at you tonight. But like I say, there's quite a lot to this, and I do think that sometimes, you know, some of the stuff that I'm going to say to you tonight, you may not have been told before or seen before, and these are tips and things that I've learned over the years to make life easier. So let's turn you around. Do remember, please ask questions as we go. So once again, I'm on Jade this week, and she's got a good amount of stitches on her. I'm going to come in quite close actually here, because when I show you the stitches, I'm going to use the large version of the stitch card from the book. Okay, so on your machine, very often, I mean, on the computerized machines, you've got loads and loads of different stitches. If you're on dials, you may well actually have a stretch setting, and you'll have a set of stitches that are designed for working with woven, nice stable fabrics, and then you'll have a set of stitches specifically for using with stretch fabrics. Okay, what you're always looking for really with a stitch that's going to work with stretch is some element of zigzag, or toing and froing, I like to call it. So, for example, these are our regular straight stitches. The very first stitch that we're going to come up to is the triple stitch. And although this is a straight stitch, what it does is it walks forwards, and then it walks backwards, and then it walks forwards. So let's just have a little look at that one first. And what I am going to say here is what also is going to really matter when you're sewing with your stretch fabrics are things like thread, for example. And I would always say you need to be using a thread with some form of polyester in it. Don't use a cotton thread, 100% cotton thread. Okay, and the reason for that is there is no stretch in that cotton. So as soon as you put that non-stretchy thread to your stretchy fabric, it's just going to snap. So make sure you're using something like moon thread is fine. I'm looking around because, oh yeah, have I got something like Gutermann do what they call an all-sew, Metler do the same. A lot of companies now do, but do use a decent one if you can. Okay, and you'll find out which ones you like or dislike. Sometimes it's about colour as well, but as I say, it needs to be a thread that's got an element of stretch. You can even buy stretchy threads now. A couple of the companies have started doing those recently that have got a slight bit of elastic in them. I haven't actually used them yet. I should get some and try them out. The other thing is not only going to be the stitch, but the needle. Needle is very important. Now, I have over here a selection of needles. Okay. And what I tend to do, okay, who's just coming? Oh, Chris, hello. Diana, hello. And oh, Carol, I think it was. You've just faded before I could see it. What I tend to do is I have got in at the moment a purple tip. It's one of the Janome purple tip needles actually, which is a size 14, and it is recommended for stretch fabrics actually, but that just so happens to be the one that I've got in my machine. Most of the time I will start sewing with what is in my machine and see how it works, because the other thing about these fabrics is that some will stitch perfectly with any needle, some will need a ballpoint needle, some will need something that's super sharp like a Microtex or something like that, and yeah, they can just be a bit picky. You can also get super stretch needles, so I would always say have a choice. So I've got two sizes in super stretch, and these are the ones that fit in my overlocker as well. So I've got 14s and 11s, and I've got ballpoint needles as well. Ballpoint needles and stretch needles, the difference is, if you think about embroidery, when you're doing cross stitch or something, the needles have almost like a snub to the end of them. So rather than being really sharp and pushing through, cutting through your fabric almost, they push their way through the fabric. So if you've got, you know, in your underwear drawer, you might have some old knickers, favourites, friends, comfortable friends, and they might have lots of little bits of white, maybe that's starting to show, or, you know, jogging bottoms and things that have been with you a long time, and you get these little bits of white, don't you? And that is actually the elastine very often that is within the fabric that's giving it its stretch. And what happens is if you use a very sharp needle, it will catch on that elastine as it's sewing it. So the ball point actually just kind of pushes its way through the fabric. The way you're going to know which is the best needle, frankly, is you're just going to have to suck it and see, stitch it out. If you're getting skipped stitches or you don't like the quality of the stitching, look at the needle, okay, and maybe change the needle out. Like I say, the purple's a pretty good one actually for just about anything and everything, I find, especially with skipped stitches. So that's quite a good one for stretch. So I am going to go on to that triple stitch, and we're going to just stitch that out first, and see if I can get you in a little bit closer just so that you can see what's actually going on. So if I slow it down, it's walking forwards, and you can see the fabric comes forwards and then goes back. So what it's doing is it's pushing the stretch out and then it's pulling the stretch back, okay, which is what's going to allow this straight stitch to stretch when we need it to. So I'm not going to stitch, oops, sorry, because I'm so close, not going to stitch all the way to the end of that. Okay, so here we go, and you can see, look, little bit of a wrinkle going on there, not much, bit wibbly wobbly, but large amount of stretch, okay, and that is what you're looking for, because if we just did a straight stitch, and I'm just going to do that just as a quick comparison. And all of this is worth doing. So looks much flatter, doesn't it? But not as much give in there. And I can feel it. I can feel as I'm pulling that if I actually give it a little bit more welly, that's going to break. Okay, and you do get that sometimes, don't you, that stitching breaks. So that is why that stitch would be better. Now within these stitches as well, what you're also going to find is the lightning stitch, and this is, it looks, hence the name, it looks like lightning, okay, and what that's going to do is just go along, right, here we go, let's get it. I don't know why I turned it around that way, didn't really need to, did I? So let's go on to the lightning stitch, and this is kind of, it's a straight stitch, but it's kind of slightly offset, so it's a very, very narrow zigzag, but this is quite a good one, and this is a very good one. I'll show you in a second because I've already done lots of samples. But look, it looks almost like a straight stitch, doesn't it? But look, huge amount of stretch and recovery on that. And if you notice, what I've done there is I have done it as if it's a seam, because that's the other thing, is you need to work out which stitches work for the side, for the seaming of your garment, and then there will be different stitches that work for the hemming of the garment. And the ones that you're going to use for the seaming, this is what you're looking for. You're looking for that seam sitting flat. What you don't want is a whole load of wiggle going on, okay? And what you do find, sometimes it's about stitch length, but very often with these stitches, your machine has got set lengths. It won't let you go much longer. It's worth checking. Sometimes what you'll find is, especially on the bigger machine, so if you've got something like an Atelier or an 8200 or 15,000, something like that, often you'll see the same stitches in a different section, and you'll think, well, that's a bit strange. Why, why have I got them in two sections? But very often the reason is that this is mode 2 or mode 1, for example, you can't change anything there. So on the utility, hang on, let me turn the pages. So mode 1 on this machine is all the utility stitches. And if I'm on mode 1, some of those stitches you can't change and some of them you can. But it's worth, if you find that stitch somewhere else, try it and then have a look at the stitch length as well to see if you can alter the stitch length. I know certainly on the 15,000 that I've got, and I've seen it on the Ateliers as well, that there are certain stitches that I have to go into a different section so that I can actually then play around with the width and the stitch length settings on those a little bit more. So that's why all these little samples and things like that are well worth doing. Okay, so we've done the lightning and the triple stitch there. Moving along the bus, this is the elasticated zigzag. Okay, and I'm going to ignore that one for a minute. I'm also going to try and stop the camera from wiggling. Oh, and then I've just knocked it again. So the elasticated zigzag, I'm just going to ignore for a moment. Okay, and then we go along here. Now look, you notice there's another lightning stitch. However, if you remember from last month, there's a middle and a left, and this means that the needle setting is going to change slightly. So what you might find is if this goes all the way to the left, so we are on stitch 11, so mode, this is what I mean, mode 2, so we've got the lightning stitch on there, and then I'm going to play, because with that I can now adjust the width. Let's get another test piece back. So I've been able to adjust the stitch length on this one. Oh yeah, Carol, the Atelier 9, lovely machine, I have to say. Very, very nice machine. But that's why, Carol, that's why they're in different places. Because, like I say, sometimes it's about the setting. So can you see how much wider that is than, was it on here? No, where did I do it? It was on here. On here, and that's because it can now, the needle is over on the left hand side, hence the L, but it means that it can now swing a lot wider on there. So this is the original one, and then you've got that much wider one. Okay, what this is basically doing, all of these things, is giving you lots and lots of choices. And I do think that when you're working with these sorts of fabrics, it's not like working with woven fabrics. Sometimes it will take you a while before you actually find the right stitch. And I think this is where things like these little sample cards come into their own, because if you do sample cards for different types of jersey, then it means the next time you actually sew something with that jersey, you don't have to do this whole process again. You can literally take it out and say, do you know what, the best one for using with Ponte, for example, was this stitch for the seams, this stitch for the actual hemming. Okay, so where did we get to? So we got along here, didn't we? Now, number 13 This is the knit stitch. Okay, and this is one, if you don't have an overlocker and you are doing the whole of your garment on here, I quite like this one. It gives you a triple stitch here down the side, and then it just does this little thing to the side. So again, let me go on here and show you. So we are on mode 2 with this one, aren't we? 13. Okay, and I can adjust that little leg that's coming over. But what it's doing, it's kind of doubling up. Now, you have got overedge stitches for stretch fabrics, probably, on your machine. The deep joy, though, of the majority of these stretch fabrics is that they don't actually fray, which means that you don't necessarily need to overedge. You just need to neaten. Okay, so this one, for example, huge amount of stretch to it, and what I would generally do with that is I stitch on my seam allowance, and then afterwards I would just trim down. Okay, now the difference between using that one and using my I've got so many samples now, hang on, where is it? Here we go. And using the triple stitch, sorry, the lightning stitch. Okay, so this is that one, and you can use pinking shears. So look, nice and neat, but the difference lays in the laying. When I turn it, it's fine, but because it's got that little overedge bit going out, if you want a flat seam, so say you're joining seams and you want less bulk on those joins and things like that, can you see how flat that lightning stitch sits? Okay, I don't know if you can actually. So this one, look, you can see that it's going to go one side or t'other, isn't it? Which means you're going to have to nest your seams and things like that. So again, sometimes it's parts of the construction of the garment, you might find that that very flat open seam there is going to work fine. And look, like I say, no fraying, so you don't have to particularly worry about that. Even you don't even have to pink it. Like I say, sometimes it's just about the look of the garment inside, isn't it? And how you feel about that. So we've done those two. Like I say, if you've got stitches on your machine that you're wondering about, the next one I was going to show you is an overedge stitch. You've got a couple here, 14 and 15, which are for stretch fabrics, and I have got there we go. So I've already stitched that one out. You have to stitch that right on the edge. It's done quite a nice job on this. I've tried it on several other, I've got some fancier sort of cable-y knit stuff that I tried it on, and it wasn't very happy with that at all. I must say, because it's pushing stuff down into the feed dogs, and so yeah, the machine wasn't very happy. So you might find your machine doesn't want to do that, but like I say, to be perfectly honest, most of the time that's going to use an awful lot of thread and take you quite a long time. So yes, it looks lovely, looks like an overlock stitch, but you know, if no one's going to see it, do you want to make that effort? Save the money from the thread towards buying an overlocker would be my advice. So now that's an interesting one, triple stitch. So what I've done here is I've actually done a flat fell, I think it's the faux flat fell seam actually, where you trim one side down and then fold the other side over. But this is something that I often do, and I've used the triple stitch to do the seam and then gone over, but it gives you a completely flat inside. So this is nice to use if you're doing like baby clothes, or even you want a bit of a feature maybe on the shoulders of a t-shirt or something like that. Just a slightly neater finish, certainly on the inside, and also a much stronger finish. So if you were doing shorts or joggers or something like that, you might want to think about that. You could equally do that with a twin needle, and we will look at twin needles in a minute. So we've gone along there, haven't we? So we've looked at those, and I think from the seaming point of view, you know, you don't need that many choices. You're either going to go with the triple stitch, the knit stitch, or your lightning stitch, I would have thought. However, when we get onto the hemming, and if you do have an overlocker, then obviously you'd be doing your seams on the overlocker most of the time, but you're still going to have to hem when you get to your sewing machine. So there are lots of choices when it comes to hemming. I don't think I've got all of the stitches here. I think I was going, yeah, look, we've got more there, and then I had some little green samples too. There we go, this extremely bright lycra. Funnily enough, I don't have a lot of stretchy lycra in my sewing room. I can't imagine why, frankly. I can't remember the last time I made a leotard. That's probably why. Never mind, wore one. Oh, here we go. So there's another couple on here. So big pile of hemming stitches, and these hemming stitches can do two things. Obviously they're going to hem the garment, which is a practical purpose, but some of them also work, like this one for example. Yes, it's hemming it, but isn't it pretty? But look at the amount of stretch in that stitch. And this one, which is some machines will have this, it's a curved version of the elasticated zigzag, so slightly more rounded, which is rather pretty. And again, look at the stretch in that. Twin needles we've got there. These are triple. Here we go. You're sitting there going, oh my goodness, do we really need this much choice? Triple lightning stitch, which look, gives a much more defined stitch. I mean, I'm using a contrast thread so that you can see it, but this one here, I've taken the width of that stitch up here to 3.5, because normally it's serving suggestion, it comes up this tiny little one on one. Okay, and a good amount of stretch, but also because it's triple, it is reinforcing it. So if you were doing swimwear or active wear that you want something a little bit stronger, a little bit more reinforcement, shall we say, then that's why you would be looking at this one. But this here, this slightly thicker version and the wider one, I'm looking at that thinking that if I wanted to do a plique of a stretch fabric onto a stretch fabric, then I could use that almost like my satin stitch, couldn't I? But I know that it's going to have a certain amount of stretch around it. Sorry, I just missed that comment that came. Yes, definitely, because, you know, the way it sits on the seam is really, really important. And what you'll find is if you were on an overlocker, you would have the what's called the differential feed, which is you've got two sets of feed dogs. Sometimes you'll find that if your fabric is shifting and moving, you might want to look at using a walking foot. Some of the slipperier stretch fabrics, I find the walking foot really useful because it's got the teeth here as well, so it grips the top, the feed dogs underneath grip the bottom. Its other name is the even feed. So basically it just evens up that feed through to stop things kind of parting company, and it will give you a much better seam. But like I said, what I tend to do is I go with what is on my machine first. You'll notice I've got the A-foot on here, and that's because it's going to give the best grip, rather than, I nearly always have the F-foot on when I'm doing decorative work, but not for dressmaking, because I want this foot here just gives a bit more grip as things are going through. If you've got a presser foot dial as well, I'm just going to bring you up. It will either sit here, or it might be on the side of your machine, or it might be in your settings. But you can also adjust very slightly the height of the foot, how much pressure it's pushing down onto the fabric. And sometimes with the lighter, much lighter weight fabrics, you need to ease that off so that they can actually shift through. Okay. I don't tend to adjust it terribly much, because I would probably rather put my walking foot on. But if you don't have a walking foot, you could do that, and that would probably help as well. Like I say, it's like all these things, you're just going to have to mess around, and the more you mess around, the more you know what's going wrong when it actually comes to it, when you're stitching, don't you? Now I wanted to look at oh gosh, look, I knew this was going to happen. I knew that this evening time would run away with me, because this is one of those subjects that, frankly, we could go on about for hours. So, talking about the feed dogs, one thing I will say is, whatever you are doing with stretch fabrics, let the machine do the work. Do not be tempted to be doing this, pushing and pulling as it goes through. Let the feed dogs actually walk it through. And if they're not walking it through, that is when you need to look at the stitch. You might want to adjust the stitch length, or use a different stitch. Okay, because that is going to be the issue. You've got to give the machine the right tools to be able to do the job. Okay, it can't read your mind, and it can't just take a look at the fabric and say, I know exactly what to do. I'm afraid we're not at that point yet. You're going to have to help it out here by giving it some options. So let's look at some of the hemming stitches, because even if you don't ever make an entire garment, one thing you might well want to be doing is actually adjusting. I don't know about you, but very often you can buy something ready to wear and think, oh, I need to take 2 inches off the length of that, or maybe the sleeve is the wrong length for what suits you. And being able to adjust it on the machine is really good. So t-shirts, for example, very often t-shirts are just that little bit too long. They sit in the wrong place. So I could do with taking maybe 2 inches off a t-shirt. And I've got choices, as I say, of stitches that I can use here. One of my favorites is the elasticated zigzag. So that is, let's go back up to mode 1. It's this ... one. So if you're stitching elastic in as well, you would be using this one. So we've got a width of 5. This is the serving suggestion. I can make it wider than that if I want to. I'm going to leave it on 5. And then stitch length 1.5. I very often find that I will actually take the stitch length up a little bit on this, and I'm just going to stitch that out. And as I go along, I'm going to make it a lot more spaced out, and I'm going to take the length up. So I've taken the length up, and I've taken the width right up to 7 as well, just so that you can see the differences going through here. So look, you can see what's going on there. Now, again, look, a good amount of give. This is probably not the stitch I would use for this particular fabric. However, I have used it on here. And I was about to say, can you see? But the fact of the matter is you can't see. And that is one of the reasons I've used it to finish this hem here, because with these busy fabrics, I find that actually by using in the right colour that elasticated zigzag, you can't really see that finish at all. Okay, I also like to use it for things like this. This is actually a cashmere mix wool fabric, which absolutely fabulous. There's only a tiny sample of this because I haven't actually used this to make anything yet, so I wasn't going to cut more than that off the end of it because I know I'm going to possibly struggle. But I've used that elasticated zigzag there. Again, you can see it vaguely because it's grey rather than this greeny colour. But I think the twin needle, which I'm about to show you, I don't think would look right on that kind of finish. So if it's got something like cables or a pattern or something like that, there was a grey bit somewhere as well, wasn't there? That had there we go, this one that's got like a sort of cable in it. This is the sort of thing that if I now run that along here, it's a bit light, the grey for this, to be honest. I'm going to take the length down probably to about 3 and take the height down as well, because I'm not going to want it quite that high. The width often is, if you've got a fabric that's rolling, because it's so stretchy, it's very, very curly, then using a wider stitch helps to hold it flat. And what I will usually do, but look, so that's actually quite a nice finish on there. And if it was a darker grey, you probably wouldn't see that very much at all. But like I say, you've got a decent amount of stretch on there. What I tend to do is, as you can see, I folded that over quite deep. I would do the stitching and then go in and trim it away, because that roll, I'll just finish that and show you. This is what you get, isn't it? So if you were to only turn that over to quite a narrow hem like that, you would probably struggle to get that straight and neat. Whereas if you take it deeper, so give yourself a much deeper hem allowance, and then when you pin at 45 degrees, because can you see that 45 degrees rather than straight actually again stops that curl going on. So when I'm working with jersey, I always pin 45 degrees just to stop that curl happening. Okay, so let's have a little look now at twin needles quickly. So I'm going to find my screwdriver. So just a little point on twin needles. Again, you can get stretch or ballpoint versions of twin needles, and I would recommend, because most of the time you're probably going to be using them on stretch fabrics. So hang on a second, let me find my way to my stretch needles. And they will also come in a choice of widths. To be perfectly honest, if I'm using them on stretch, I would probably be going for this one, the 4. This is my favourite. So it's 4 millimeters between the two needles. Okay, and that is a stretch needle. Okay, this one's 2.5, and look, you can see much narrower. But I would, like I say, I prefer to have slightly wider between my channels on stretch. So it just goes in, although it's a twin needle, look, there's only one bit here. You may well have on your machine, hang on, this is going to take a while because I've got the camera right where I need, there we go. Need to see what I'm doing. There we go. Okay, so tighten that up and then go in with your screwdriver as well, just to make sure it's fine. You can't use your needle threader for this. I'm going to bring you back out so you can see the threading. So I'm already threaded up on the back thread, my usual one. I've gone all the way round, and I'm going to put a different colour in so that you can actually see. So I've put my spare spool pin in. Okay, and you follow it exactly the same. So it threads up in exactly the same way, apart from when you get down to just above the needle, often you'll find that you can go one side and one the other side. Okay, and that second one I've put on the right hand side, so I'm going to thread that through the right hand needle. Like I say, you don't be tempted to try and use your needle threader, because that will not end well for either the needle threader or your twin needle. And then let's just get a straight end and through here. Try and match your threads so you've got the same threads going on here. This is why I need a needle threader on all my machines, you see. Oh, it's still fluffy. Hang on. There we go. Okay. So make sure that they're not twisted. And sitting in nicely. Lovely. Right. Now, this machine does have a twin needle setting. Okay. And if you press that on some of the machines, when you press that twin needle setting, it will actually block out stitches that you can't do. So what you'll find here, because I'm on a zigzag, it's probably going to, yeah, I can't take that stitch width up. It won't let me, because it knows that with a twin needle I won't have the full swing of the needle. If your machine doesn't do that, whatever you do, always check your stitch. Just crank the handle to the side. Don't do needle up, down. Just crank the handle through the process to see. Most of the time, I would not be using the twin needle for anything with a swing anyway. I'm usually using it with a straight stitch. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to my regular straight stitch. And for this, I can use a regular straight stitch. And the reason is, if I put this in underneath and start stitching, should have got that out of the way at the beginning, but let's run it across. I'm going to run it to the end, and then I'll explain my deliberate mistake. Okay, there we go. So we've got a nice neat line of double stitching there. The deliberate mistake is you always have to stitch it on the front. So I would normally have stitched it on that side, because this is the bobbin, and you can see that the bobbin now zigzags between those two lines of stitching, which then allows that straight stitch now to stretch, which it didn't when we just had that single line of straight stitch, did it? The thing to look out for when you're using a twin needle is don't know if you can see this. Can you see there's this slight bump going on here? So what I would probably do with that is I will drop my tension. I'm already on 3.5 because I was using it earlier today. But you can drop the tension. If this is kind of pulling up in the middle, tunneling as it's known, then drop your tension a little bit more, just so it allows that bobbin a little bit more stretch as it goes between those two stitches. But that gives you a really, really neat finish, especially on, like I say, the plainer fabrics. And it gives that finish that you very often get on t-shirts. But as I say, this is the 4mm, and I think the 4mm does look really nice. You can get 5mm and 6mm. Do check though, because it's going to depend on your machine. This is a 7mm machine here, so I could get I have got a 6mm somewhere or other, I'm sure I have. So I could use a 6mm one on here, but if you've got a 5mm machine, obviously you won't be able to use it. You can also use things like the lightning stitch as well. So let's do it on the right side this time. Okay, because that's got a very, very slight zigzag. Now, as I said, this has got a twin needle setting, so it wouldn't let me change. I'm pretty sure if I go in, it's going to limit how far it's going to let me take that width, because it will know that I can't do it. So if you don't have that twin needle setting, just crank the handle through the process just like that, really slowly, always towards you, because you'll know straight away if it's going to hit something. And these aren't cheap, these needles, so you don't want to be breaking it before you've even started the process. So let's have a little look at how that one looks. So again, quite neat, isn't it? The zigzagging is on the underneath between the two, and a good amount of stretch, more probably on that one. So yeah, if it was swimwear, underwear, things like that, I would probably be using the lightning rather than just the regular straight stitch, because I can feel that that's having a little bit of give in there. Now, gosh, we're heading towards an hour, so if anyone's got any questions, now's the time to ask. Okay. One other stitch that I haven't shown you that I would like to show you is the honeycomb stitch. Oh, one other thing while we're on the subject, and I did mean to mention this. When you start sewing with stretch fabrics, they don't always like it. The feed dogs will just go, oh, yum, I'll have a bit of that. And if you start right at the end, you'll often find that it will get stuffed down in your feed dogs. So just use a piece of fabric that basically you can stitch across it, and then you can start stitching quite happily. So I will stitch across that and then just push in my actual fabric, and you can see, look, because it's happily sewing, it will just carry on without having stuffed it down at the front. I'm not going to demonstrate because then I'd have to take the whole machine apart, and we're running out of time. So no questions from anybody, and then you just literally cut that away. Okay, and then you can just keep reusing that. But as I say, it does mean that you get a really good start on your fabric rather than it going down. Also, because a lot of these stitches are very, you know, they're going side to side, and they're quite busy stitches, so they don't particularly, the feed dogs will just go, oh, yummy, yummy, I'll have some of that. Now, lightning stitch, we've done. Honeycomb, and then I'm stopping, I promise. Okay, quickly, honeycomb. It looks like this. Okay. And I won't stitch it, and I'll tell you for why, because I've got a twin needle in. But that is what it looks like stitched out, and it's another one of those that's a really good one for hemming, and huge amount of stretch and recovery. So this would be really, really good if you were doing dance wear, swimwear, that kind of thing. And it is actually quite a pretty attractive stitch as well. So I think, oh, have I gone through? I think I've gone through pretty much everything. Let me bring you back to the front. Gosh, this is the longest one I've had so far. I knew it was going to be like that because, like I say, it's just a huge subject. But I am hoping that I've gone through enough there for you to actually go and have a little play and have a little look at those stitches. And then just to wrap it up and quickly say, next month, I thought we'd have a look, as we're sort of going through, I'm going to have a look at the blanket stitches, because there are lots. So we'll have a look at a couple of the different blanket stitches. I'll just send out, I mean, these are fairly basic cushions, so I'll just send out maybe some hearts. Hearts are quite a good one to practice. So we'll do a PDF for a project for that, and we'll look at the blanket stitches next month. And thank you so much for watching. And like I say, if you can spread the word and if you can subscribe, if you want to watch it back again, because it was so scintillating, if you want to watch it back and you don't want to have all the comments on the side, then you can watch it on the Janome UK YouTube channel as well, where it's just posted as a video rather than a live feed. Okay, so all the ones on there, you don't get the comments on the side, you'll just get the actual video. However, on either of those channels, you can still comment after the event and ask questions. So if you suddenly think of something that you hadn't thought of, then just let me know and I will try and answer those in the comments. So thank you very much for watching, and see you next month.